Now is part 2 of Snow White. As we heard, Snow White was spared by the huntsman, and she ran into the forest until she found the house of the 7 little men, and she was living there happily, despite the warnings of the small men to watch out for the evil stepmother queen. Now, she heard the warning of let no one in the house. But, the queen, having eaten Snow White's heart as she was supposed, felt quite sure that now she was the first and the fairest. And so she came to her mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" While the glass answered, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." She was very angry when she heard this. The glass had always spoke truth, and she knew that the huntsman must have deceived her. Snow White must still be living, and though she was still alive, the queen, she had to think very hard, and she thought, and how could she manage to make an end of Snow White? For as long as Snow White was alive, well then the queen was not the fairest in the land. Envy left her with no rest. At last she thought of a plan. She painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, so that no one would have known her. In this disguise, she went across the 7 mountains until she came to the house of the 7 little men. And she knocked upon the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell, fine wares to sell." Well, Snow White, she peeped out of the window and cried, good day to you, good woman. What have you to sell?" "Oh, good wares, fine wares," answered she. "Laces of all colours," and she held up a piece that was woven of variegated silk. "I need not be afraid of letting in this old woman, this old good woman," thought Snow White, and so she unbarred the door and brought this pretty lace. "Oh, what a figure you are, child," said the old woman. "Come, let me lace you properly for once." Snow White, suspecting nothing, stood up and she let her lace. It was the new lace, but the old woman laced it so quick and tight that it took Snow White's breath away, and she fell down dead. "Now you have done with being the fairest," said the old woman as she hastened away. And not long after that, towards evening, The 7 small men came home, and they were terrified to see their dear Snow White laying on the ground without life or motion. They raised her up, and they saw how tightly that she was laced. Why, they cut the lace too, and she began to draw breath, and little by little she returned to life. The little men heard what had happened, and they said that old peddler woman was not other than that wicked queen. You must beware of letting anyone in when we are not at home. When the wicked woman got home, she went to her glass and she said, "Looking glass against the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And it answered as before, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White, living in the glen, living with the 7 little men, is 1,000 times more fair." And when she heard this, she was so struck with surprise that, well, all the blood left her heart. She knew that Snow White must still be living. "But now," said she, "I will think of something that will be her ruin." And by witchcraft she made a poisoned comb, and then she dressed herself up to look like another, different sort of old woman. And so she went across the 7 mountains and came to the house of the 7 little men. She knocked upon the door, cried, "Good wares to sell! Good wares have I to sell!" Snow White, she looked out and said, "Go away! I must not let anybody in." "Oh, but you're not forbidden to look, are you not?" said the old woman, taking out the poisoned comb and holding it up. It pleased the poor child so much that, well, she was tempted to open the door. And when the bargain was made, the old woman said, "Now for once your hair shall be properly combed." And poor Snow White, thinking no harm, let the old woman do as she would, but no sooner was the comb put into her hair than the poison it began to work, and the poor girl, she fell down senseless. "Ah, now, you paragon of beauty," said the wicked old woman, "this is the end of you," and so went off. Now, by good luck, it was now near evening, and the 7 little men, they came home, and, well, when they saw Snow White laying on the ground, well, she looked so dead. They thought directly that it must be the stepmother's doing, and they looked around and they found that poisoned comb, and, well, no sooner had they drawn it out of her hair, Snow White came back to herself and related all that had passed. Well, they warned her once more to be on her guard, and never again to let anyone in, not anyone. The queen went home, and she stood before the looking-glass, and she said, "Looking-glass upon the wall, who is the bravest and the most beautiful and the fairest of them all?" Well, looking-glass answered as before, "Queen, thou art a beauty rare, but Snow White, living in the glen, or with the 7 little men, was 1,000 times more fair, and her bravery, too, is right there, above yours. Sorry, but I have to tell the truth." Well, when she heard the looking-glass speak thus, she trembled and she shook with anger. "Snow White shall die," she cried, "and though it should cost me my own life, I don't care any more." And then she went to her secret lonely chamber, where no one was likely to come, and it was there that she made a poisonous apple. Oh, it was so beautiful to look upon, being white with red cheeks, so that anyone who should see it must long for it, but whoever ate even the most smallest of bites must surely die. And when the apple was ready, she painted her face and clothed herself like a peasant woman, and she went across the 7 mountains to where the 7 dwarfs lived, and when she knocked at the door, Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anybody in. The 7 dwarfs told me not to, and I always listen to the 7 little men." All right," answered the woman. "I can easily get rid of my apples elsewhere. There, I will give you one." No, I don't want your apples, old woman," answered Snow White. "I dare not take anything from you." "Why are you afraid? Are you afraid of poison?" said the old woman. "Look here, I will cut the apple in 2 pieces, and you shall have the red side, and I will have the white side." The apple was so cunningly made that all the poison was in the rosy half of it. Snow White longed the beautiful apple, and as she saw the peasant woman eating a piece of it, why, she could no longer refrain, but stretched out her hand and took the poisoned half. But no sooner had she taken a morsel of it in her mouth than she fell to the earth, dead as a doornail. And the queen, casting on her terrible glance, laughed aloud and cried, "As white as snow and as red as blood, as black as ebony, this time the little men will not be able to bring you back to life again." And when she went home, she asked the looking glass upon the wall, "Who is the fairest and the best of them all?" At last it answered, "Oh, you are the fairest now of the all." Then her envious heart had peace, as much as an envious heart can have. The dwarves, the 7 little men, well, when they came home in the evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground, and there came no breath out of her mouth, and she was surely dead. They lifted her up, and they sought if anything poisonous was to be found, but Felices combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but all was to no avail. The poor child was dead, and remained dead. Well, when they last laid her up on a bier, sat all 7 of them round it, and wept and lamented for 3 whole days, and then they would have buried her, but while she looked still as if she were living, just merely sleeping, with her beautiful blooming cheeks. So they said, "Oh, we cannot hold her away in a black ground." They had made a coffin of clear glass, so as to be looked at from all sides. They laid her in it and wrote in golden letters upon her stone her name, and that she was a king's daughter. They then set the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always remained by to watch it, and the birds came too, and they mourned for that Snow White was loved by all. First an owl, and then a raven, and lastly a dove. Now for a long, long while, Snow White lay in the coffin and never changed, but looked as if she was asleep. Well, she was still as white as snow and as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony wood. It happened, however, that one day a king's son rode through the wood and ended up at the 7 little men's house, which was near it. He saw on the mountain a coffin, a beautiful Snow White within it. He read what was written in gold letters upon the stone. And then he saw that the 7 little men come forth, and he said, "Oh, please, let me have this coffin. I will give you whatever you want, whatever you ask for it." But the 7 little men, they told him that they could not part with her, not for a single second, and not for all the gold in the world. But he said, "I beseech you, please give it to me. I cannot live without looking upon Snow White. If you consent, I will bring you to great honor, and care for you as you were my brethren." And when he so spoke, the good little 7 men had pity upon him and gave him the coffin. And the king's son called his servants and bid them to carry it away upon their shoulders. It so happened they were going along. They stumbled over a bush, shaking the bit of poison apple out of her throat. It was not long before she opened her eyes and threw up the cover of the coffin. She sat up and was quite alive. "Oh dear," she said, where am I?" she cried. "The king's son," he answered, so full of joy. "Why, you are near me." And relating all that happened, he said, "I would rather have you than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's castle. You shall be my bride." And Snow White was kind and went with him. The wedding was held with pomp and great splendor. But Snow White's wicked stepmother, who was also bidden to the feast of the marriage, when she had dressed herself in beautiful clothes, where she went to herself her own looking glass and looked into it and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" The looking glass answered, "O Queen, although you are of beauty rare, the young bride is 1,000 times more fair." She railed and she cursed, and we will find out what the wicked stepmother queen did to part 3 of Snow